I want to just follow up in this sixth of the lectures what I was talking about last time, namely Lutheranism and its spread. And I think we need to take into account the rapidity with which it takes over. It is very fast indeed. Generally, one could say that Lutheranism starts to generate a popular appeal in the 1520s. In other words, pretty much all at once. And it's reaching not just into villages, not just into towns and urban areas where we have a reasonably sophisticated people, but it's reaching also into courts. The classic one would be the court of Louis II of Hungary. His wife, Mary, she's a bit of a lass, really. She drinks a lot, spends huge amounts of time dancing, is apparently rather overweight from feasting too happily, but she is a Lutheran. So is one of the King's principal advisors, George of Brandenburg, a minor Brandenburger from Anhalt. These are protective of the Lutheran communities that emerge in the capital city of Buda. And Louis II may instruct all sorts of laws condemning Lutheranism out of hand, threatening to burn Lutherans. He's not going to get anywhere. The court is able to, or sections in the court are able to protect the Lutherans, and as a consequence we have a number of the churches, including the main parish church of Buda, which is now the Matthias Church in Budapest, that actually has pretty much Lutheran clergy running it. So in other words, we get a fairly major advance, popular and to an extent courtly. Then in the 1530s, or certainly by about 1530, we find it's taking over in the towns, and that town councils are being overthrown in order to have Lutherans replace them. Town councils are elected by the citizens. I mean, none of this sort of going into a polling booth with a piece of paper and a pencil. It's by show of hands. And they can be fairly rowdy affairs. And Lutherans, pro-Lutheran magistrates and mayors take over. And then really in the 1530s, 1540s, we start to get princes following Luther's ideas. The earliest of these is, Frederick the Wise, on his deathbed in, I think it's 1525, converts to Lutheranism. And his son, I think it's called George, George is a Lutheran from the very start. And the 1525 also sees one of the most remarkable changes in Europe, which is when the head of the Teutonic Order, which runs a vast swathe of territory all along the Baltic shore, he converts to Lutheranism, disbands the Teutonic Order in that place. It continues elsewhere. Disbands the Teutonic Order in the north and divides up its lands among the leading knights, all of whom now become landowners, Lutherans, and take wives. Hitherto they have been monks on horseback, or we could say they're raw military administrators, actually. They're more armchair generals. But now they become Lutherans. The Teutonic Knights, just to add to the confusion, the territory of the Teutonic Knights is not part of the Holy Roman Empire, but the head of the Teutonic Knights is a member of the Holy Roman Empire. The very significant, the support given by princes. And if it's not direct support, it is indirect support of leave the Lutherans alone. There are too many among your subjects are Lutherans, and therefore you're going to get into difficulties if you act too harshly upon them. But the power of the princes is very important because it means that they are free in most places from persecution. What has wrecked previous heresies has been the lack of secular support. So, for instance, you've got all these heretical groups, Waldensians, who believe in a simple form of Christianity to be practiced in mountain communities in northern Italy, Albigensians, who believe the world is created by the devil. All of these have perished because they haven't had political support. They haven't had strong men who can defend them. And Lutheranism does. It either has princes who back Lutheranism or princes that don't dare to take it on, or town councils that have become Lutheran. So in other words, there is a high degree of protection. The exception that in a sense proves the rule is the Hussite heresy, which survives in Bohemia. We will look at Hussitism a bit later. It's generated in the early 15th century. It is in a sense proto-Protestant. It's primarily in origin anti-clerical, but it goes on to challenge papal supremacy, to argue the centrality, although not the exclusive centrality, of the Bible, and also a more participatory form of divine worship. The Hussites survive in Bohemia because the king's opposed to them, but the local nobility back them. Where they don't have the support of the local nobility, Hussitism is extinguished. It gets absolutely nowhere in northern Hungary because the king doesn't support it, the Hungarian king, and on top of that, the local nobility don't want to support it either. So in a sense, it's the proof. The place where Hussitism actually gets on, apart from in Bohemia, is, funnily enough, in Moldavia, in the Orthodox world, and that's because the Orthodox princes just consider it so wacky, they're not going to do anything with it. I mean, what are these people going on about? They just let it carry on, and it degenerates into basically religious services where people have fits and start screaming, and that's what happens with a religion if it exists within an undisciplined framework. Okay, so that's how the spread occurs. The princes protect or don't take it on, the cities protect. What about the Habsburg lands? Here we have rulers of Austria and then of Bohemia and Hungary after 1526 who are committed to Catholicism. What are they going to do about it? And the answer is there's not much they can do. In the German areas, which is obviously most of Austria, and the Austrian lands, Styria, Carinthia, Carniola, etc. Slovenia, Carniola is less affected because it's Slavonic, and they regard Lutheranism as a German religion. Very telling, that. But throughout the Austrian lands, we find Lutheranism spreading. The great cathedral, St. Stephen's in Vienna, is a Lutheran church. We find In the cities of Bohemia and Hungary, where there's a German population, we find it spreading. Likewise into German agricultural communities in Bohemia, around the rim of Bohemia, where there's quite a concentration of German population. You will know that area as the Sudetenland. And likewise in Transylvania, where there's a very substantial German presence, particularly in the southeastern part of Transylvania. Lutheranism spreads there. So in other words, the Habsburgs have got most of the Austrian lands going over to Lutheranism, and quite significant chunks of Bohemia and Hungary. And as for the Holy Roman Empire, which gives them the title of emperor, that is gradually making its way towards Lutheranism. The Elector of Saxony converts in the 1520s, Brandenburg converts in the 1530s, Rhineland converts about 1540 comes to mind. So in other words, there's quite a spread there. Now, of course, Charles V, as Holy Roman Emperor, passes all sorts of legislation banning Lutheranism under pain of death, and his brother Ferdinand, who rules Austria on his behalf as regent and is king of Bohemia and Hungary after 1526, he publishes tough ordinances as well. But there's really there's a limit to what you can do, because increasingly the diets are getting filled with people who are either Lutherans, have moved into a sort of midway position, adopting a bit of Lutheranism, a bit of Catholicism, that sort of mix and match which I talked about last time, which we call syncretism. Or they don't see why people should be persecuted for their beliefs. And the diets are getting filled up with either Lutherans or compromisers or tolerant folk. And if the Habsburgs start acting roughly, they are going to run out of money, because that is what the diets give. If they lose the diets, they're going to have to collect the taxes themselves. It's normally the diets and the nobility that collect the taxes. They know where the peasants are. If you've got as king to extract finance yourself, that means you're going to have to put in an army. You've got to pay for that too. You're going to have to put in an army. You're going to have to draw up your own tax registers. Just to explain how complicated that is, in Britain we have this land tax called council tax. It's operating on registers that are about 30 years old. Lots of people have built extensive annexes to their houses, which should put up the value of the house and therefore the amount of money they pay, but it hasn't been registered. People don't know. In other words, it's too much of a bother to set up and organise a new tax list, even in the UK. So imagine what it's like in something like the 16th century. So in other words, you're going to have enormous difficulties gathering taxes if you are a ruler. If you discharge the diets, trying to arrest people, it's not the sort of thing that can be done. And they're more and more, so it's become particularly the case in the later 16th century. It's rather like Tiananmen Square back when it was 89. Tiananmen Square puts the end to communist resistance to democratic transformation, because the communist rulers can see what they have to do They have to put in an army high on drugs and massacre people in public. And they don't want to do that in 1989. And rulers look at what Philip II of Spain is doing. They look at the burnings of heretics in the Netherlands, in Spain and in the New World, the persecution of religious minorities. They think we don't want to go down that road. And so a mood of toleration prevails. I'm going to look more at that mood of toleration next time, but that's enough for the moment. Thank you.